This is the Miracle Marathon benefiting Children's Wisconsin, one of the finest children's hospitals in the world. And we're here to talk about Jordy today, who's not quite two. Jess is mom. Jess, so nice to meet you. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're good.
Great.
So you and your husband have 3 kids. So Jordy is your youngest. So you've had the parental experience before. You know exactly what to be looking for. So when Jordy was brought home, he's like 11 days old. What was going on? What happened? What did you notice?
So we had kind of, a normal run-of-the-mill day. I was on maternity leave, and that night he just had, the whole crew goes to bed, and mom and baby stay up all night, and he was starting to sleep a little bit longer through the night, and that night he was more fussy than normal. He wouldn't want to eat, just crying. I couldn't put him down, and he was just not himself. He had already in the first couple of days been a pretty easygoing baby. So we kind of limped through the night, and that morning I took his temperature, and it was 101.1, which for an 11-day-old newborn, I called the pediatrician, and then they sent us to Children's. So
what did they do when you got there?
We got there, and they triaged him, and they did, they kind of admitted us into a room. And at that point, I think they were probably trying to calm my panic, but they treated it as pretty run-of-the-mill thing, and they immediately did some lab work. They did some blood work and urine, and then they did a spinal tap where he had to bend forward, and they took some spinal fluid, and some of his levels dropped, and it was a little bit scary, but they did that spinal tap and analyzed that fluid, and I think we got there around 11 o'clock. By 2 o'clock, the nurse was telling us that we were meningitis positive and that we were going to be admitted. And we were by, 3 to 4 o'clock, we got admitted to the 5th floor PICU, which is, I think, oncology and infectious disease. And so we were admitted there, and within hours, they had him on long-term monitoring leads where they were gluing, I think it was 20 leads to his scalp to monitor seizure activity. And that first night was kind of uneventful, but you could tell he was declining and things were escalating. Some of his vitals were off, his heart rate was rising, and they couldn't control that. And by 4 a.m., they told us he had some subclinical seizures. So seizures I didn't see, he was in my arms, but they said they could tell there was seizure activity on his leads. And by 7 a.m., they had emptied his room of every piece of equipment, every chair and bed, and they had it felt like 100 people in that room, but it was me and a nurse practitioner and nurses and residents and interns and the attending, and they were putting in I think it was a central line and an arterial line, and they'd sedated him and they intubated him, and it was MRIs and CTs, and from there, the first 11 days were pretty dire. They kind of said that was our kind of that tipping point zone.
And I don't know if people understand though, but bacterial meningitis, especially when I'm talking about little babies, that is a real touch and go proposition. What did they tell you about that?
So our nurse practitioner was awesome. And she's like, she said it's roughly 50-50 kind of at that point. And then from there, they told us it's once in a newborn, they said it's 50-50. And then the minute they got him and they did some of the diagnostics, which it showed some right frontal lobe brain damage as well as occipital lobe, the rear lobe brain damages. They said it's basically kind of the rule of thirds, that there's a 33% chance he will not come home. And then there's a 33% chance that he would come home with some delays or deficits that could be immediate and could be not till school age that we see. And then there's a 33% chance he comes home normal as can be.
And so we kind of going on, you have 2 other children, and I'm assuming jobs and your husband, and how are you handling all of this?
We have a village. You have a village. Yeah, so luckily the kids, at the moment the kids don't know it, but they're going to be fine. This is going to be a blip on the radar for them. So my husband and I kind of checked out. I lived at the hospital for the whole time. I stayed home. I think I came home, a handful of times to grab some essentials or do some things. My husband stayed with me in the hospital the first couple nights and then realized that he was better helping, trying to keep the daily life going. But it was a lot of passing the kids around. They slept at multiple aunts and uncles' houses and friends. And then my husband would stay at home with them some nights, and they would come up to the hospital throughout the day. The child watch program through Children's is unreal. So they set up and facilitated that first visit with Jordy and explained all the monitors you're going to see and all the tubes and why he is what he's looking like. And they gave them little presents and coloring books and really tried to make it, it's scary enough for an adult to see. And I think for the kids, It is probably terrifying. I even look back at the pictures and I'm like, it's pretty daunting. So they visited a lot and they came a lot. And then oftentimes they'd come after school or daycare and spend the night with me, and we'd do our homework at the hospital and try to have some family time and eat dinner in the cafeteria and do homework, and they'd shower, and then I'd drop them off. And I had the nursing caliber there. They're amazing. And they would, your biggest fear for me, my biggest fear as a mom was leaving Jordy unattended in a hospital. He's this little 8-pound baby and he's in this hospital bed that he's swimming in. And I'm like, I'm going to leave him and he's got nobody. And these nurses, I would let them know when I was leaving and they would check in with them. And I'd often come back and there was a student nurse holding him and rocking him. So they made sure he was never alone. They'd leave me notes. They were at the nurse's station waiting for me. And it was just, I didn't have to feel like, my husband's trying to work, because he went back to work after about 2 weeks. And I was still luckily on maternity leave, but, bills still have to get paid and life has to go on. And you have 2 more you're trying to keep as normal as you can. So we have a great crew.
You have to. You have to. I wanted to ask you about, from the parent's perspective, you're an experienced parent because you have 2 children older than Jordy. When you had the first 2, did you need children's at all? Did you have to, did you give it a thought? Like, did you would ever need that?
My first one has stayed out of the children's,
universe.
The children's eye. Yes, the universe. My second one had 2, my middle, he's a kindergartner now. He's had 2 very day procedure, routine, minor surgical procedures at Children's, where he was admitted by morning and gone by night. He had a little dermoid cyst on his scalp and they did it in a day surgery. And he came home and then he had a splinter in his knee because that's what boys do.
Yeah.
And they removed that. And both of those experiences in the Children's universe were equally as fantastic. But at the time, it seems like such a blip on the radar. Like to them, it's probably so routine and average that until you experience this, then you're like, oh, they're professionals and they're amazing at everything. It's just at the time you don't realize how great it is.
Jess, can you talk about the fact that all these parents we're talking with, life was normal, and then all of a sudden you become an expert on something you never thought you would be an expert on? Can you talk about that communication with everyone at Children's and how they kept you informed?
Sure. Oh gosh. So you're dancing this dance of not being the overbearing or over knowing parent, but still wanting to be involved. So I'm a veterinary technician by trade. So not that I know everything, but I sometimes know just enough to be dangerous, I feel like. So I know some of the medications and I know some of how they work. So I was involved they do kind of rounds and huddle every morning and night, but they come around as their team and everything, because it's a teaching hospital, everything's such this conglomerate learning, there's students and attendings and residents and interns, and they're all coming together. So they kind of do their breakdown where they go through, here we have Jordan, he's a 15-year-old newborn male with group B strep meningitis, with seizures, brain bleeds, blood clots. And then they go through all the things. And then they'll ask myself and the nurses, how did you feel he did overnight? What was a setback or an advancement you had? What's your concern for the day? And so they take I felt like when I was in those things, they treated me almost as if now I'm just a parent. I was his like caregiver nurse, where I could, everything I saw, nothing was useless information or nothing was information they didn't need. Everything I supplied was like treated as if it was like a gem of knowledge that they could use in treating him or figuring something out. And so you were just so included in this process where you don't have to feel like you're there more as just a bystander. I felt like I could supply things that helped them and that they took into account what we had seen or noticed or what we were worried about. So
now, can we, for those who are watching, you can watch the interview. He is, I think, maybe the cutest child I've ever seen. But
are you cute?
He's going to be 2 at the end of the summer. Tell us about where he is now developmentally.
Sure. So we're kind of kicking out specialties throughout this past year. As we got discharged, we had a lot of repeat rechecks, repeat EEGs for brain monitoring. We had repeat some serial blood glucose and monitoring lab work wise. So as we've gone through, we've kind of eliminated a lot of our specialties, hematology and infectious disease. Even our neurologist is done with us, which we love her, but it's okay.
Yeah.
But we still routinely see, we're very still involved with ophthalmology. So there are some visual delays potentially with him. He has some wandering of his eyes and vision corrections that we're working on. And initially they were afraid it was some, it's called cortical blindness, but where there is no connection between his brainstem and his retinas, but that since now they think it's just some delayed, they call it delayed visual maturation, but 10 days in a coma, I think they're giving him an account to kind of progress at his own time. So ophthalmology, and he still sees audiology for hearing. Some of the antibiotics they use with bacterial meningitis long-term can cause some toxic changes in his eardrums. So he does see ophthalmology pretty routinely, or audiology. And then he does a lot of rehab services.
Okay.
So they said he still does some speech, or he's going to be getting involved in speech as he gets a little older. At the beginning, it's fine motor and gross motor skills and making sure walking and jumping and crawling and reaching for things and those fine motor skills he's advancing on. And now he's going to be reassessed. Actually, this afternoon, he's got a big assessment with adding in speech therapy. So he seems, compared to my 3, again, they teach you to you no longer compare him to any other child. You compare him to himself. But he still does seem a little bit, sometimes his speech isn't where I would think it was. So he is going to be doing some speech therapy. We're going to start some music therapy.
It seems like he's got those fine motor skills down. He can,
as he eats, I'm like, how do I keep him entertained and like maximize his cuteness without having like hitting buttons, talking? I'm like, food works.
Yep.
What's the snacks? Because he's loving it, whatever it is.
We went from raspberries to Cheez-Its. So we're just kind of going through the motions, huh?
Balance.
Yeah.
Yes.
He is as cute as can be, and he is a miracle, and that's why we do the Miracle Marathon. Jess, thank you so much for your time.
Oh my gosh, you guys, thank you so much for having me. This is, it's the least I feel like us as parents can do is to have an opportunity to kind of sing the praises of Children's Hospital and hope that somebody else gets the same experience. I know the outcomes aren't always the same, but what Children's Hospital does and their staff it's unbelievable.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for doing this.
Okay, Jordy, it was
awesome. Thank you.
Bye. You're listening to the Miracle Marathon on KLH.